Welcome to my talk, Diversity in Our Time, a Rendering Perspective. My name is Apollo Ellis. I am a doctor of computer science with emphasis in computer graphics and rendering from the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. I have a master's from the University of Texas, Austin, and a bachelor's in computer science from the University of California at Berkeley. This is not an NVIDIA talk. This content relates in no way to my employer NVIDIA or any of its affiliates or standpoints on any topics whatsoever. This is my story and purely so. So diversity is something I've thought about for many years, and I think I've always had trouble kind of convincing myself and framing it to myself in the context of something like HPG. And that's because I really don't know how to relate the experiences that I've had in life with the experiences that other people have had in life, and then somehow tie those into what we do for a living and who we are and what our contributions are going to be at the same time. And I do think those things are somewhat related, but moreover, I think that it's important for us to just be aware that the probability with which a given contribution in this community contributes to the final render, so to say, those probabilities are vastly different. And if we're going to get a better, more efficient renderer at the end of the day, theoretically, by using something like importance sampling, and yes, I'm still talking about diversity, by the way, if we're going to efficiently kind of solve this problem, and our problem in this community is graphics, if we're going to get the best ideas and the best contributions, we need to kind of watch out for biasing our results by simply picking the people and the contributions that seem to be the brightest, right? Because when you have other probabilities for these other samples and these other ideas and other contributions which could be out there in the community, and you don't properly weigh them when they come in, what you do is you kind of lose your unbiasedness, first of all, but also I feel like you get the wrong image. And so that's a convoluted way to say that as a community, as HPG, we do want to encourage people who don't necessarily usually contribute to contribute. And I think this applies to all kind of other walks of our field. So whether you're in business in a team, or you're in school, in industry, whatever it is, I think that not discounting the difficulty and low probability of some contributions versus those of others is going to shoot us in the foot at some point. So yeah, my theory is that D&I brings us closer to ground truth and faster. It's a more efficient renderer, so to say. And I think that we're solving such a hard problem here as computer graphics scientists that we really are going to need a lot of different ideas and perspectives. So to that note, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I got to where I am today. Okay, so first off, at about 12 years old, when most of you were probably either studying algebra or pre-algebra in junior high, I was jumped into a street gang, which was known to be very, very violent, both towards other street gangs and towards its own members. So I was a victim of lots of violence from within my gang, and also lots of violence between my gang and the other rival gangs. And so going to school, for example, sometimes in the morning I'd get out of the car and I'd notice that there was 20 to 30 rival gangsters waiting for me outside of the school, and I had to kind of somehow figure out a way to get to class without getting killed. So this was a part of my life, and it wasn't something that I knew how to deal with as a 12-year-old or that I was particularly adept at. but this is what I was dealt. So this is actually an image of me taken a few years later after the initial gang violence had kind of died down, but I had sort of decided that I was a thug and that this is the life that I was destined to lead. And as you can see, smoking away and being very daunting in my look was something that I felt was important. Again, at this point, most of you were probably in pre-calculus. So yes, while most people who had a future in a community like HPG were learning about things like this and learning to solve problems like these, I was more or less trying to learn how to solve problems like these, which were in my face all the time. And as you notice, they look somewhat similar to how I did in the picture. So I was lost in this entire world of the ghetto and of crime and of violence and of kind of this warfare stuff. And I was very lucky to even make it out alive by many standards. What I thought was important at that point was somehow making money and having power. And at 15, I don't think you should necessarily be concerned with such things. But if you are, it's very tempting for younger people, I think, especially in the places where I'm from, to think that the easiest way to do that is through some illegal or streetwise manner. And obviously, that's not a good idea, and this is how I got to learn that lesson. So again, while people who are going to get to where I'm at now typically would be in an AP English class or AP Spanish class or AP math class or AP programming class in preparation for college, I was preparing to do exactly the opposite and go absolutely nowhere with my life. So, in my opinion, and from the people that I've talked to who grew up where I grew up and who went through the kind of things that I went through, the choices that I wouldn't actually even call them choices, but the routes that we took tend to not end well on average. And I'm not saying that everyone who gets jumped into a gang dies, but everyone has some kind of horror story from these kind of walks of life. So for mine, I was with a bunch of people partying up all night, many days, very tired, very just overdone it for quite a while. And someone I knew who I looked up to, who was like a hero to me in this kind of street game and drug game and all this stuff, turned out to be a psycho and decided that he was going to try to kill me. And so he decided that one night while I had been passed out from partying that he would take me in his car and unfasten my seatbelt and proceed to drive off of a freeway. So apparently he was also somewhat suicidal. Drive off of a freeway at full speed in the middle of the night. So once that happened, I think I had PTSD diagnosed shortly after. And as you can imagine, self-esteem dropped, and there were a lot of other repercussions, but most importantly, my mental health began to fade fairly quickly. So while many of you at this age were probably doing something like this, graduating from high school, I was more like here, and luckily so, because I very well could have been dead from all the things that I had been going through and doing in my life. After some time, I recovered from my kind of high school experiences. Well, recovered, quote unquote. I spent a lot more time alone, and I stopped hanging out with the people that I used to hang out with. Now, something new, or a new demon, I like to say, set in and made its way into my life. And as I mentioned before, my mental health, which had been seriously shattered by some experiences from my childhood, began to deteriorate into something much more serious in terms of a mental health condition. So it turned out that all this stuff that I thought was important in my life turned out to just be this as an adult. Things that I would look back on and cringe or fear and could never really escape, and began to kind of govern my experience in the world. So yeah, so it turned out that I was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and that was actually right after I decided to return to school. So this was somewhat bad because I had kind of decided to turn my life around, and then this hit, and I don't think I or my family or really anyone I knew was anyone in my circle was prepared to deal with something like this. And actually here, to turn things around a bit and to credit the incredible scientific breakthroughs and work that we've had in our culture and in the world, there was a solution for this. There was something out there that did work. Now there's side effects, and you will be taking this for your whole life, but if you do, it's possible to recover. Absolutely. And so meanwhile, I finally got to do some solid studying and do some math and start to think differently about the world than I did as a youngster. And I think that was, this was probably one of the most beautiful times in my life, because I started to kind of leave behind all this hell that had erupted into my life at a very young age. And I started to think, like a programmer, right? I started to be more logical and take classes in C++ and think about things like the future, and think about things like how to make the most money and what kind of degrees do I need and what do I want to do. And believe it or not, I actually knew I wanted to do computer graphics from about the second year as a programmer. I wanted to, as many people do, go into game development. And so I started learning about 3D art and also about how to program with that. Eventually, I even made my way here. So this is UC Berkeley. I buckled down, studied hard, and I got in as a transfer student. This is a shot of the tower, and obviously, and of the math hall and Corey Hall, which is actually where EE and CS are at Berkeley. And I guess the best thing of all back then was that the past stopped looking like this. It wasn't this demonic, freaky thing that I thought was going to come back and get me. It just started to look like there was a future. I started to look down the road, and I kind of did feel like, a cowboy on his horse riding off into the sunset after a while, and things just began to turn around. So I finally got myself some of these, got some tassels, and some more tassels. So this is graduation from the master's. And then, I started to notice that my heroes had changed. In particular, so this is supposed to be a kind of a businessman, Superman, hero guy who you might not consider a superhero naively, but arguably, just like my life was turned around by the feats of science, and I think that as an industry, we do some really incredible things. I began to attract towards things like legendary programmers. One of my first heroes was John Carmack, and I thought that he was the coolest thing since sliced bread. And if you had rewinded my life 10 years ago, I would think, well, he's just a nerdy white guy. Why would I care about that? So things had become completely different for me, and this continued. Even me, I started to feel like I was good at this stuff, and maybe I was a superhero of some sort. And yeah, I actually published some of these. So my first year in grad school at UIUC, we submitted a paper, it got rejected, and I came to give the talk anyways as part of some extended poster session. The next year, the paper was accepted. The next year, I had a cool ray-binning paper or ray-binning poster that I submitted to HPG and got to come present. Took a year off to actually graduate, and then came back in 2019, and that was actually the first year that we started the diversity program. And I was lucky enough to, I was blessed enough to win a Best Paper Award that year. And so here's a picture of that with my co-authors, Warren Hunt and John Hart. Definitely two of those superheroes that we saw in the earlier slides, at least to me. Okay, so what did we do together here? We looked at some facets of life that absolutely make no sense with respect to them producing contributions to HPG, right? But they did. And so I think if we're smart, we'll use that as feedback into our important sampling mechanism to remember that some of those paths that go off in some crazy direction in our scene, some of those paths actually do return a contribution, and therefore we should weight them appropriately, and especially for the future of our conference, we should be aware, and we should focus at least some amount of resource towards helping people from paths that don't make sense make it to the conference, make it to the field, make it into STEM, and make it into a position in life where they can contribute something meaningful. In a lot of ways, this may just seem like some juxtaposed talk in the middle of a conference where it has no place. And that's all right, because sometimes you do start with a noisy image while you're trying to converge on the right thing. And effectively, you can consider this a firefly. Every path tracing enthusiast's best friend. And so as much as I'd like to consider myself some rising phoenix, I'm actually more or less just a part of this process, just a part of a Monte Carlo integration over the future of the world. So yeah, diversity takes time. So does path tracing, but we'll definitely get there. We're going to need all the samples that we can get, and we're going to need to try to stay unbiased as much as possible. This is my favorite slide from the entire slideshow, mainly because this is my favorite thing to say to myself when I think about how massively different people and teams and things get together and create incredible products. And I will say that where I've ended up and on my team, we are very different, and together we're a strong team. And I will say that as a community in HPG and as rendering and graphics people, we're all kind of superheroes, and we all do incredible things together. And we are, believe it or not, still very different, and I think that makes us strong. So we'll get there in a few seconds to the end of the talk, and I just want to thank you guys for coming, and I'll see you in the metaverse. Fully unironic.